going over Chapter 9, looking at human resource management. When you start thinking about HRM, human resource management, the whole idea behind it is, what are you doing as far as the people are concerned? What are you doing as far as finding, bringing in, training, and handling, managing the human aspect? It talks about the activities that managers perform. Okay, the human capital are the people. You have knowledge workers, okay, and you also have those who are doing the actual labor. And then you have social capital. In other words, what are the relationships and things that we have with other people? The strategic process, the strategy that goes along with getting the right people on board, you have to think about the vision and the mission of the organization in total. From there, what you're doing is you're trying to figure out what kind of human resources do we need? What are the types of people? What are the types of jobs that need to be filled? That sort of thing. Recruit and find and select those folks, orient and train, and then you're doing your performance appraisals. The whole idea behind it is making sure that you are achieving organizational goals. In getting the people there, you have to understand what it is that you need as far as the work is concerned. So what are the things that you'll do? One of the first things is a job analysis. In other words, what are the things that the job needs to be able to do? From there, you'll put together a job description. In other words, what is it that that person does so that you can identify the right things that the people are doing. You can see what it is that they are doing and compare what the expectations are to what they're actually getting. Job specifications are basically the qualifications that's necessary for a job. In other words, does the job need a high school diploma? Does it need a college degree? That sort of thing. You're always trying to think about, what are we going to need in the future? You have to be thinking in the future so you can figure out, okay, so what labor, what skills are necessary for our organization going forward. You'll also be doing an inventory as far as your human resources. In other words, what are the people that we have? What are the skills that are on board? Which ones are missing? Which ones do we have too many of? That sort of thing. Then you start looking for the right folks, and you're doing recruiting. In other words, you're trying to go out, you see people who might be good, and you try to get them into the organization. You can hire internally or externally. In other words, hiring internally is basically saying, okay, we have a position for a supervisor. Who are some of the folks that are already in the organization that can fill that gap? External hiring is where you're going outside the organization to try to find the right talent that you need for that organization. There are pros and cons to both. As far as your internal recruiting advantages, you have people who are already familiar with the organization. You have people who already know the various jobs and what the culture is like and things like that. It's a heck of a lot cheaper. Also, as far as trying to hire somebody, the external recruiting advantages are you might find somebody who has the specific knowledge and skills that you're looking for that you don't have within the organization. And you're bringing in new points of view. Internally has its own disadvantages. In other words, one of the things that you're doing is you are not bringing in new knowledge, new ideas, and things like that. Externally, it gets much more expensive and it's going to take a heck of a lot longer. So there are some pros and cons to both hiring internally and externally. The most effective sources, employee referrals. If somebody is going to request that you give them a referral, that you say, okay, here's someone that we should be hiring. If it's somebody that you don't think is a good hire, or you wouldn't trust them or something along those lines, you're not going to make the suggestion that they be hired. And so the employee referrals is really one of the most effective sources. There's also other areas such as LinkedIn. This is one of the reasons why I always tell folks, have a good LinkedIn profile, because that information can really extend more your reach as far as what are some of the open jobs and things. Another external recruiting method is a realistic job preview, where you actually put somebody through a portion of the job so that they get a feel for this is what it's actually going to take. And you can kind of figure out, is this something that they can do? In the selection process, you're also going to be doing things. You might be looking at resumes. You're going to be looking into the background information, doing interviews, and possibly some tests. When it comes to the background information, you may be calling references. You're not going to get much information from those references. The reason for that is because there have been so many lawsuits that have been going on from people saying, okay, you called this company, they gave you a reference, and they didn't tell you the truth about my background, what it was that I did. Also looking at resumes. Resumes many times are going to be inflated. So you can't really put a lot of credence into the resume. Now, the resume is something that is a marketing document. It is not a hiring or selection instrument. It's a marketing document. And so a lot of people have a tendency to kind of inflate what it is that they're doing in the resume. You might have some interviews, and those are very, very important. And the reason for that is because you can get a better idea as far as who that person is and what their background is, if you do your interviews right. And then you might have some employment tests that go along with some of these things. And when you start talking about interviewing, there's different types. You have your unstructured interview. You sit down and you just have a conversation. There's no planned questions, and the person who is doing the interview is just trying to get a feel for who that person is, what some of their background is. When it comes to hiring, that is not a real beneficial way to determine, is this the right person or not? Then you have structured interviews. Now, there's different types. You have your situational interview. Now, the situational interview is basically saying, okay, here is a hypothetical situation. Here's a situation. What would you do? Now, that's not very effective as far as interviewing is concerned, because people can tell you all kinds of things that they might do. The most effective way of interviewing is what's called behavioral interviewing, where you put together your questions based on the job description you're trying to fill. Let's say one of the things that is necessary is good customer service skills. So one of the questions you might ask is, tell me about a time when you had a difficult customer situation to deal with. What was it? What did you do? And how did you handle it? In other words, you are trying to find out what it is that they've actually done in the past. With behavioral interviewing, the assumption is past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. So if you can tell if someone has actually done something based on the story they tell and the details that go into it. Behavioral interviewing is really the most effective way of interviewing. It also takes the longest time. You might have some ability tests. In other words, what kind of physical strength do they have? What kind of mental abilities? You might have some performance or skills tests where you're trying to measure what it is that they're doing for the actual job tasks. Now, they talk about an assessment center. An assessment center is basically where you put people in a situation and they have to solve the situation. You might hear about inbox exercises. Inbox exercises are basically you have a series of tasks that need to be done. How are you handling those? You might also have integrity tests. In other words, you will be challenged with a particular situation and asked, how would you handle it? And it's based on integrity. For example, a lot of police forces in their hiring put people through integrity tests to determine, does this person have the integrity to be a police officer or not? You may also have personality tests, things like the Myers-Briggs or something along those lines, to determine if the person is a good fit for the job and for the organization. Almost every organization now is going to have some sort of drug testing. If you get a drug test, if they ask you to do a drug test, chances are they're going to give you a job opportunity. They're going to give you a job offer. Now, The key here, when any kind of test that is going to be used as a hiring instrument must be shown to be statistically valid and reliable. Valid or validity means it's measuring what it's supposed to measure. Reliable means that you get the same results every time. So anytime there's any kind of testing that's going on, a Myers-Briggs, for example, or any kind of polygraph, or in some of these things, the company that is giving that has to show statistically that that is required for doing the job. Once you're hired, there's going to be compensation and benefits that goes along with it. Okay, you have your compensation, your wages and salaries. Benefits, things like health insurance. That's one of the key things that people are looking for today. What kind of retirement plans, what kind of recreation options are there? In that compensation, you may have base pay, possibly some bonuses and things like this. There could be some other incentives. Okay, so in other words, stock options, various other things that go into the compensation for a particular job. Benefits are huge. They are actually providing almost 1/3 of your total compensation. So for example, let's say that you have a job that's paying you $24. Basically, they are giving you another $11 an hour in benefits that go along with it. Benefits are very, very expensive, especially the healthcare benefits today. Once you are hired, you're going to go through an onboarding process where they're trying to integrate you into the organization so that you're familiar with what is the culture like, what is it that is required as far as how we dress, how we act, things like this. You'll also go through an orientation. Here's some of the key things that the company is about. Here's what the job will be doing. This is what the organization's mission is and how you relate to that mission. What are the work rules? Things like this. So you'll go through an orientation process. You'll also go through training. Most training is going to be on the job. In other words, you're new, you come in on the first day, you go through the orientation with human resources, and then you're sent out to your work area. You're typically paired up with a more senior employee who will then start to show you the ropes and show you how to do the job. There's also off-the-job learning. In other words, what kind of classroom classes will there be? What kind of videos would you have to watch? Then what you do is you measure people's performance. So they're working, then you have to give them a performance review of some sort. With the system, as far as performance appraisals, you have to define what the performance is. What are the expectations? What are the things that the person's supposed to do? During that time, as a manager, you're monitoring and evaluating their performance, making notes as far as what it is that they're doing. You're coaching them on a consistent basis. Then what you do is you step back and you review their performance. You give the feedback as far as how well they're doing. Here are the good things. Here are the things that need to be improvement. Then you might have some consequences. In other words, here are the rewards, the raises or the bonuses that you might get. You're going to be put on a performance improvement plan, this sort of thing. Performance appraisals are also called performance reviews, and what you're doing is you're assessing and providing feedback as far as what they have done over a period of time. Now you can have an objective appraisal. In other words, you're supposed to produce 50 widgets an hour. Are you producing 50 widgets an hour? Okay. It's hard to challenge that legally. If they are doing it, it's difficult to fire them. If they're not doing it, you can go ahead and let them go. You have reduced bias. And then the real issue is the subjective appraisal. It's basically based on how the manager sees that person's work, and a lot of times it's based on traits and behaviors. Traits are questionable, very questionable as far as what it is that they're doing. Behaviors are a little bit easier. Now there's several different types of performance reviews. Okay, it talks about a BARS or behaviorally anchored rating scale. I'm going to show you some examples of that. This is one here. Now this is not a very good one. In this one here, you can see that The person is being reviewed or appraised based on these areas here: computer skills, scheduling, meeting deadlines, accuracy, etc. And then it says, okay, for each of those, was it unsatisfactory? Did they meet the expectations or did they exceed the expectations? What does exceed expectations mean? What does meets expectations mean? For one manager, a person's performance may exceed expectations. For a different manager, that same person and the same output might just meet expectations. There's a lot of variation that could go along with this. This sucks as far as I'm concerned. Now here's a little better example as far as a behaviorally anchored rating scale. If you notice on this one, you can see that they have identified what they mean by exceptional, very effective, effective, unsatisfactory. You can see that they have said, all right, this is what that really means. Then what they do is they have the various areas where they are judging the person's behavior and performance. So for example, focus on results. And what they've done is they have identified what are the behaviors that go along with that. In looking at a person's performance on their focus on results, you take all of this into account and then determine, was it exceptional, achieved, performance consistently exceeds expectations all the time, okay, was it very effective, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. So this is better as far as a BARS type of performance review is concerned. So that's an example. Those are a couple of examples of behaviorally anchored rating scales. Now you also have what's called a 360 assessment, where what you're doing is you are getting people all around you to provide input into what your performance was. Your boss, your peers, your customers, the people that report to you, all around you. That's the 360 part. All around you, people are providing some sort of input into your performance appraisal. When I was at the pharmaceutical company, we went to this and I absolutely loved it. I loved it. I did primarily a series of project work. At the end of each project, I would ask for feedback from those people that I was doing those projects for. And I would basically say, okay, what was it that I did well that you would like to see repeated? What did I not do that you wish I had done? What did I do that I should not have done? And I would get that information and I would analyze that. I would pull all that together, give that to my boss, and then she would write up a summary of all of that. Now, she trusted me enough to actually do this honestly. We would sit down together and identify, here are the people that I need to get that feedback from. Okay, and there could be some people that, thought highly of my work, and there were people who thought, okay, didn't do all that great a job. So in other words, the whole idea behind it was balance. To give you an example of what that looked like, this was my final performance review when I was at the pharmaceutical company. It was for 1999. We did this in the spring of 2000. And you can see some of the things that I accomplished. Now, lead one was a 6-month leadership development process for about 25 to 30 managers. We were meeting once a month or twice a month for 6 months. Series of 7 habits for highly effective people classes, facilitating classes, satellite programs. I was doing a lot of facilitation. For example, I spent quite a bit of time pulling together and then facilitating a series of meetings for the presidents of the 2 companies of the merger that we were going through. Okay, the president of my company was Jerry Bell. The president of the other company was John Leone. And what we did was we pulled them together and their staffs, and I was facilitating and leading the meeting that started the initial merger that went along with that. So you can see I was actually doing quite a bit of facilitation. I had a series of special classes that I was doing. I created an intranet site and kept that up and posting new information and things like that. I had spoken at a national conference and served on other advisory councils and things like that. And so summarize some of the key strengths and feedback that I received. And my boss put together an overall view as far as what she saw for my performance. And so that's how our performance process worked. I absolutely loved it because it gave much more feedback and better feedback than I would have gotten just from my boss, because many times my boss didn't know all the things that I was involved in. So this worked very, very well. So that's an example of 360-degree assessment. Then you also have the forced ranking. In other words, the whole idea behind forced ranking is, let's say that you have 10 people. You're going to have to identify each of those 10 people and number them from 1 down to 10. The top 20%, in other words, of those 10 people, 2 of them are going to be in the top 20%, and they're going to get bigger raises and things and promotions. Those are considered A players. Then you have your B players, people in the middle. All right. The raises they'll get will probably be primarily inflationary. In other words, cost of living raises, things like that. And what you're doing is you're coaching and working with them, trying to get them to be A players. Then you have your C players. There has to be somebody at the back end. And this person, chances are, is going to be pushed out or fired. That's what forced ranking is really all about. You have your A players, you have your B players that are trying to make A players, and then you have your C players. C players need to be moved to a lower type of position or forced out of the organization. I do not like forced ranking, and the reason is because it pits everybody against everybody else. You destroy all kinds of teamwork with the forced ranking system.